She had never allowed me to go through her old belongings, but now I had no choice. As I searched through her closet, my hands brushed against a small wooden box hidden in the back. I pulled it out carefully, my heart pounding. Inside, a bundle of age letters lay tied together with a delicate ribbon, their edges yellowed with time. My fingers trembled as I untied the knot and picked up the first letter. It was from him. I waited for you that night. I stood in the rain, hoping you would return, but you never did. I don't know what happened, but I will always love you. My breath caught in my throat. I turned the letter over, my eyes scanning the date. It had been written decades ago. A shiver ran down my spine as I flipped through the rest of the letters. Some were filled with longing, others with sorrow, and at the very bottom of the pile, I found a photograph. My mother stood beside a man I recognized. The man from the bookstore. They were young, their faces lit up with a happiness I had never seen in her before. Her eyes full of something unmistakable. Love. A cold wave of realization washed over me. Who was he to her? And why had he mistaken me for her that day? I needed answers. I couldn't push it aside any longer. There was a connection between my mother and this man, something buried in the past that no one had ever spoken about. The letters, the photograph, the way he looked at me. It all led to a story I had never known but was now undeniably a part of. The next day, I waited outside the bookstore, anticipation twisting in my gut. I knew he would come. When he finally appeared, I didn't hesitate. Walking straight up to him, I pulled the photograph from my pocket and held it up before he could say a word. Tell me the truth. Who were you to my mother? His face drained of color. His eyes flickered between me and the photograph, and for a moment, I thought he might turn and leave. But then, with a shaky breath, he spoke. We were in love, he said, his voice raw. More than anything, we wanted to be together. But she left, and I never knew why. His voice cracked, and something inside me twisted painfully. She never told me about you. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. His expression shifted. Part heartbreak, part disbelief. Not once. I shook my head. He ran a hand through his graying hair, his gaze distant. Then, as if something had suddenly clicked, he looked at me again, truly seeing me for the first time. She left so suddenly, he murmured. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letters. His breath hitched when he saw them. His hands trembled as he picked one up, tracing the faded ink with his fingertips. She kept them, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. All this time. Swallowing hard, I handed him something else, her diary. The pages were filled with my mother's handwriting, a life she had kept locked away. He opened it slowly, reading in silence. Then, suddenly, his breath hitched. His grip tightened. She loved me, he murmured to himself. She never wanted to leave. My own hand shook. Then why did she? He exhaled, shaking his head. I don't know, but I did, because there was one letter I hadn't shown him yet. A letter separate from the rest. A letter that had never been sent. And in it was the truth. I hesitated before finally handing it to him. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned my mother's words, the words I already knew by heart. But watching him read them, seeing the realization dawn on his face, made it feel even more real. He stumbled back, as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. No, he muttered. This can't be. But it was. My mother hadn't simply left. She had been forced to. She had been pregnant with me. I felt the air leave my lungs. The man standing before me, the one who had looked at me with such painful longing, wasn't just someone from my mother's past. He was my father. His wide eyes met mine, his expression shifting from shock to something unreadable. I could almost see the puzzle pieces rearranging in his mind, the horror settling in. He had thought I was his lost love, but in reality, I was a child he never knew existed. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The letter slipped from his trembling hands, his entire body shaking as the truth settled in. She never told me, he whispered, his voice so faint I almost didn't hear it. She never gave me a choice. Pain twisted in my chest. She was scared, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was defending her or just trying to make sense of it all. He turned away, running a hand over his face as if trying to steady himself. I spent years mourning her, loving her, waiting for her. And all this time, his voice broke. I swallowed hard. I had thought I was uncovering a love story, but I had uncovered something else entirely. Something that never should have been hidden in the first place. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "I don't know what to do with this," he finally admitted, his voice raw, broken. Neither did I. I had searched for the truth, but now that I had found it, I wasn't sure I wanted it. Some things weren't meant to be discovered. Some truths were better left buried. But it was too late for that now. He sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, staring at the letter as if he could change its words just by looking long enough. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? The man he had been, the love he had carried for decades, it had all shattered in an instant. The truth had stolen everything from him. Finally, he spoke. She should have told me. I nodded. She wanted to, but by the time she could, it was too late. His jaw tightened, fists clenching at his sides. I spent years searching for answers. I thought she abandoned me. I hated her for it. And now, he let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. Now I find out she was protecting me from something I never even knew existed. I want to comfort him, but I didn't know how. He exhaled sharply, the sound filled with bitterness. I loved her so much. I built my whole life around memory. And now, I don't even know who I am. I understood what he meant. For years, he had longed for someone who had never truly been gone, because a part of her had always been with him. Me. I don't know how to fix this. I admitted. He let out a weary breath. You don't. His voice was quiet but certain. Some things don't get fixed. Another silence fell between us, but this time it wasn't as heavy. It just existed. The truth had already done its damage. Now, we had to learn how to live with it. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out one last letter, not from my mother, but from her best friend. She wrote this before she died. I said, handing it to him. He hesitated before taking it, his fingers trembling as he unfolded the paper. This time, there were no gasps of shock, no broken whispers, just quiet acceptance. She loved you, I said softly. She never stopped. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He simply nodded, pressing the letter against his chest, as if it was the only thing keeping him together. I stood, feeling the weight of everything settle into my bones. I think she wanted you to know that. He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. I turned to leave, but before I walked away, I glanced back one last time. He was still sitting there, lost in memories that were no longer as alone to bear. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing a ghost. I was finally ready to let her go.